get you go to school.
And here's your
What do you think of what's going on right now, mate?
These evil little invisible parasites.
Satan-worshipping Freemason moron.
Do you understand what I'm saying?
We're not run by factions.
Get the fuck out of camera!
There are much more powerful international forces in play.
Is this pink guy? Is this what pink guy is? I don't fucking know what's happening.
Please go outside and look at the moon quickly.
It's been crazy, guys, but guess what? It's how it is, mate.
Mate, because I want to do you slowly.
Well, I ain't spending any time on it.
Well, g'day, patrons, and welcome to our premium episode. I think it's we're in the billions now, aren't we, Joel?
You've run that joke every week. Like
Yeah.
it's great. I love it. It's just like the joke that will never die. We're at
It's just like-
54.
54. We're not
Like the
54.
studio.
I thought we weren't numbering them at all, but we very much enjoy bringing these to our patrons who keep the conditional release program running and give us some sign that at the end of the day we are being listened to and we are
interact.
being supported to.
We do get a few sort of nice things, which is cool. Bit of a reminder that someone's actually listening to this, but we did put a bit of effort into it. Had a bit of sort of flurried writing today and got some stuff in there. So yeah, look, if you want to flick some message or I don't know, just whatever, or just keep giving us money and be quiet, that's fine, I guess. Well done to you. Bless your hearts.
Look, we used to call this overflow, but it's not overflow. This is material that we won't be handling on the conditional release program, or not in this way. And we're going to start off today with the Kathy Folbigg, Folbigg pardon. Because that's been in mind.
It's been a big news story. If you've been living under a rock, that's okay. Or if you get all of your news from us, we are sorry. We've been very relaxed. But this week, Kathy Folbigg was pardoned and sort of exonerated of her 2003 convictions.
That's important.
2003 was a while ago. This is 3 for murder and 1 for manslaughter. So they're overturned. But of course, 2003 was 20 years ago. So she spent 20 fucking years. And her sentence was 30 years.
Yes.
She spent 20 years behind bars in fucking jail. Mental.
I have to say, this case resonates with the sort of Lindy Chamberlain murder verdict in 1982.
Huge.
Where public and media mob sentiment sort of crowed for a conviction.
She's still a joke now, which is fucked up.
I tend to agree with, we talked about this on the Two Jacks yesterday, and I tend to agree with Jack, Hong Kong Jack. And when
that's
he
dangerous.
says, well, no, in these cases, certainly, when there's sort of, the pitchfork crowds are screaming for someone to be dealt with harshly in the criminal justice system, it generally means that no good outcome is going to come from it,
Yeah.
And so people actually believe this. There remains a litany of books still in print with covers that scream Folbigg's guilt.
Oh, yeah.
One true crime text was revised with new material included and concluded that Folbigg was Australia's worst female serial killer. That was the title of the book. That was revised in 2019.
Ooh.
And we talk often about the true crime, the pitfalls of true crime.
Well, imagine if the podcast genre was out then. She would have been fucking eaten alive.
Absolutely. I mean, there's one way of approaching this. Now, obviously, she was convicted. We've just talked about that. So that allows true crime writers to come in and basically make assertions on the basis of the trial outcome.
Yeah. We do similar, allegedly, till it's not.
As we sort of roll into this, there was just so much that was wrong. The book, Australia's Worst Female Serial Killer, and its revised edition in 2019. And by 2019, there was just an overpowering amount of evidence, which was screaming for an appeal or a pardon. The author, Matthew Benz, wrote this: 15 years in jail to contemplate the deaths of her 4 children, and the best explanation she could come up with at the inquiry, this was the first of 2 inquiries, eventually held in mid-2019, was that some sort of supernatural power had taken them, her children.
Well, that's what you think.
Heartbreakingly, that says everything. I do not doubt for a second that Kathleen Folbigg, by some mental leap, believes she did not kill her children. Mm-hmm. The experts have pointed to someone with extreme post-traumatic stress disorder, again, where are those experts? The question of how a woman with such severe mental issues has never received any support in or out of jail was not addressed by another in a long line of highly respected judges. Kathy Folbigg, this is the last sentence in the forward, is a killer, Australia's worst female serial killer.
Strong words.
Yeah, that book written by Matthew Benz highlights what can go wrong in true crime when journalists and writers take a view that they refuse to change.
Yeah.
Benz wrote a revised edition, as I just read from, called Kathy Folbigg, Australia's Worst Female Serial Killer. It's published by Penguin Random House in 2019. That's the revised edition, where he declared her guilty yet again, despite what we're going to lay out for you now, patrons, a laundry list of concerns over that 2003 conviction.
Yeah.
And when we delve a little bit deeper, we will see that she should never have been charged in the first place.
Wow. Yeah, okay.
So this is not some, now we have this sort of advances in forensic pathology to be able to determine that she's not guilty, although there is that.
Well,
but when we look at this, really open it up, we'll see that she should never have been charged in the first place.
You definitely know more about this than me, but there's been some really interesting stuff you set me on today with some of the theories behind what you've been sort of looking at. But I mean, at the end of the day, realistically, this guy should come forth and basically say, okay, or at least apologise, or at least come forth and come clean about his reasoning on why you would say this.
What were you doing?
Like, trying to sell books, maybe, but like just be honest, because this is, that's a bad thing. If she's innocent, and of course they've ruled that she is, then she's been basically stitched up for one of the most horrible situations in her life. Her children dying in front of her, and then being blamed for it and put in jail for it. Like, you want to talk about post-traumatic stress disorder? Tick, 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 tick. I mean, fuck, man.
Yeah, but it does make you a murderer. And
No, but like, if your children die and then you're put on trial for it, regardless of the verdict, that is traumatic as fuck.
Oh, absolutely.
Your children dying is traumatic.
Basically destroyed her life, and we'll get to the issue of compensation fairly soon. And it is one of those cases where the state of New South Wales will bring the checkbook, and they might just sort of save themselves a bit of time by putting in 6 zeros first, and they'll figure the rest out later. I mean, 7. it is a huge compensation payout that'll come her way. It'll probably happen very quietly, but there won't be any dispute from the state at all, because they will accept that they've got this wrong. She was, just to clarify, so she was convicted of the murder of her second, third and fourth children, 2 girls at the end, and manslaughter of her first son, who was, I think, 19 weeks of age when he died, and all 4 were under the age of 2. But what we're looking at here is, yes, there was a media firestorm. Yes, there was a public clamouring for her to be dealt with, but it's a failure of the criminal justice system.
It is, yeah. And when it comes down to these sort of like, overzealous prosecutors and things like this, I've got a friend of mine, a client who's judge, and we were talking about one of the prosecutors there, and this great moment where the lawyer basically said, there's one person who's got away with murder in this courtroom, and that's you. And that was to the prosecutor. And I was like, one of those things where you're just like, oh, wow, okay. Because this guy, and I believe this was the guy who was involved in the case, because we were talking about this case. And it's just that thing of like, some prosecutors just want to get scalps. They just want scalps.
Well, that's their job.
Mate,
and it's an, adversarial system, and
it really shouldn't be.
And reasonable doubt is there, but then some trials can be absolute farces. We won't perhaps dwell too much on the defence on Folbigg's defence counsel, because they're pretty fucking useless too.
Yeah, well, how much can you afford? I mean, this is just some woman who's getting on with her life, and she's beset by tragedy. What, is she meant to have $80,000 for a fucking silk?
Yeah, well, be appointed for her, but there were a number of omissions there that should have been taken up by the defence.
Well, you get legal aid if you're eligible for it.
There is a sense, and I noticed that 730 did a very good report on this false conviction
Yep.
last night. And there is a concentration on the diaries that she kept. She wrote her thoughts down in notebooks, and these were ultimately used to, as by the prosecution, to seek, to portray them as confessions.
Wow.
And we'll deal with that in a little while. The diaries are very interesting because they were certainly overplayed in the trial, and then I think the rest of it, a lot of people are saying, this is just down to advances in forensic pathology, that we're able now to identify a genome that carries with it a disposition for, let's say, SIDS or pediatric cardiac problems.
Yeah.
And that's true to a point. But even after the conviction, and we'll go back and look at it before she was actually charged, and we can see there that other very similar cases, were getting knocked over. That the evidence at the time, or the perhaps prevailing view of forensic medicine, was being challenged at the time.
Yeah.
But there were pretty much from the time of her conviction, there were real concerns being expressed. Probably the first one to grab this was Emma Cunliffe. She wrote a book called Murder, Medicine and Motherhood.
Yep.
It's published in 2011, so 8 years after the conviction.
Yeah, that's a while.
And it first highlighted some of the deficiencies in the prosecution, including those diary entries made by Kathy Folbigg, which we'll deal with later. And then former head of the Victorian Institute of Forensic Medicine, Professor Simon Cordner, commenced a review of the files. He just did this basically on his kitchen table. He read the Emma Cunliffe's book and became so concerned about what he read there that he grabbed the files and commenced a review of them on his kitchen table, and ultimately came up with a 100-page report, which was published in the Journal of Forensic Sciences in 2015, which was highly critical of the court's findings, describing an obsession among law enforcement and prosecutors with and I quote, homicide hypothesis, which in fact has little forensic pathology content.
Yeah. Yeah.
That was 2015. In 2019, a study paper entitled Infanticide versus Inherited Cardiac Arrhythmia was published in Oxford Academics Eurospace Journal of Arrhythmias and Electrophysiology. And the paper had exclusively examined the deaths of Folbigg's 4 children and determined that both her daughters had a genetic predisposition for a condition called QT long syndrome, a heart signalling disorder that can cause fast, chaotic arrhythmias.
Ugh. Yeah, so in 2021, a petition featuring the signatures of Australia's sort of specialists in genetics and pediatrics and cardiology and forensic scientists and that, that sort of field, that led to a second judicial inquiry, which determined that there was reasonable doubt and led to Folbigg's exoneration and pardon this week. So it's been a process that's involved a shitload of experts and people coming together, basically, like making an effort. I mean, it didn't happen by itself.
Well, and we'll get to the then Attorney General Mark Speakman first, but he called for the first inquiry. So there was one in 2019, which we've just mentioned in regard to the book written by Matthew Benz, and then there was a subsequent judicial inquiry which just wrapped up in April, basically, and made its recommendations, and they were acted upon by the current Attorney General. And led to Folbigg's conviction being overturned.
It seems like Speakman's a pretty good bloke. I mean, I'm no Tory, but...
Yeah, look, he did very good stuff. I mean, the fact that he established a 2019 inquiry, and I'm not going to speak for Mark Speakman, but then that 2019 inquiry determined that there was no reasonable doubt. And then, and I think he looked at that and went, are you sure? It did concentrate on the diary so much. Rather than the forensic evidence, and then said, well, if that inquiry didn't work, I'm going to launch another one. So that's Mark Speakman. He deserves a great deal of credit for this, and we'll get to those people who deserve a bit of credit. But it's not a sort of it's not about looking at things now in our state of technology and knowledge around forensic medicine that we didn't have in 2003 when she was convicted.
Yeah, like it sort of should have happened.
Let's just go through the trial. I mean, she was charged in 2001. She was charged, as I say, 3 counts of murder, 1 count of manslaughter. Yep. And then the trial occurred, wheels of justice moving quite slowly, almost 2 years to the day in 2003. And the trial was a farce. And the concentration of prosecutors was around those diaries where Folbigg had written, distressed and immersed in grief, that she'd sought to make some sense of the tragedy that had fallen upon her. After the death of their 4th child, the husband came across these notebooks and, without speaking to her, went and took them to the police. Now,
good.
Well, look, you've got to understand this guy's in grief too. Their marriage has fallen apart, unsurprisingly.
Yeah, of course,
I don't apportion any blame his way. I think I would leave that with Kathy Folbigg to draw any conclusion there.
Yeah,
but
fair.
the police took this. They were very suspicious about the deaths of these 4 children, and they took these diaries, these notebook entries, and used those basically to prosecute.
Fucking hell.
That is so. A mother's grief, you would have to understand, must involve a deep-centred expression of guilt after what she'd been through.
Fuck yeah.
And so she wrote these private and personal expressions of grief, and they were used against her at trial as signs of a confession. And that's the first part. But the really important part is the forensic stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean,